Hello and welcome to our first edition of our brand new German Bundesliga podcast, a video show. So here today we have Rory and myself, Mark Broadhurst, and we are going to be doing the show every week. And so feel free to join us every Sunday evening at 6 o'clock to kind of check in with our podcast. Yeah. So today's going to be a preview of the Bundesliga, of the Bundesliga 2020 to 2021 season. So we're going to kind of go through the main topics and the main talking points ahead of the season, which starts on the 18th, which is next Friday. So let's start with probably the main topic today, which is going to be obviously the title challenge. So Rory, do you have any kind of early front runners, any teams that you fancy to run away with the title this year?
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty obvious to say that some of the usual contenders are going to be up there again this season. Bayern Munich, after their stellar campaign last season, obviously won everything there was to win. Obviously a treble season that they'll live long in the memory. Obviously they're going to be right up there. As a strong team, that you're not going to be able to get up that many other teams that'll even challenge them. However, there's always going to be a bit of competition early doors in the season. So I think, given the kind of current situation, how the squads sit as we're doing this recording right now, RB Leipzig are going to have a decent shot. They've obviously come close on a number of occasions now, but have been falling just short. Again, it feels like Bayern have been strengthening more so, and other clubs such as RB have been kind of struggling to hold on to their stellar players. So it's kind of like that pull of the bigger teams. So RB, I think, will certainly be up there as a challenger. And then obviously Borussia Dortmund are always in the conversation, but always seemingly the bridesmaid rather than the bride. However, obviously they're always up for the fight. Usually make a half decent start to the season, so if they can put a bit of pressure on Bayern early doors, then who knows? I know they're going to be playing each other fairly early doors in the season as well, so that could be an interesting game. Again, probably a lot of the competition for the title race depends on how the next month goes, obviously in the transfer market. If, for example, Dortmund keep a hold of Sancho, then they're going to be a lot stronger in terms of competing game to game. So yeah, it's certainly going to be an interesting mix of those three. Plus, you never know, the odd dark horse here and there.
Yeah, I think while I agree with you on most of those points, I think there is one team there that I would add to the kind of title mix. I would say Bayer Leverkusen. If you look at the way that they finished the last season under Peter Bosch, I think I was really, really impressed with them. And I think while many people would say, okay, they lost Kai Havertz, but I think they can reinvest that money into some real quality. And I think, obviously, just in the last few days, they have signed Patrick Schick as well, who really impressed me on loan from at Leipzig last year. Obviously, they've signed him permanently from Roma after a bit of a kind of failed stint there, really, in Roma after being highly rated. But I think in general, I do like the look. I am a big fan of Peter Bosch as well. I think he has a good record, obviously, taking Ajax to the Europa League final a few years ago. He had a bit of an unlucky stint at Dortmund, but I think Leverkusen has really kind of rebuilt his reputation. I like the style of football that they play as well. Like, they score absolutely bags of goals. Especially after lockdown last year, it was just magnificent. Yeah. Are there any players for Leverkusen that really stand out, Rory?
I mean, how the squad at the moment, there's obviously a couple of decent players that are still knocking around, but I do think there's a big gap to fill with regards to Havertz. I think he was obviously their stellar player. So obviously the pressure is ultimately going to fall on some of those other players to breached the gap that those goals and assists have gone. And obviously Havertz he's a young player, but he was also a club, the club captain for the team. So there's obviously going to have to be certain players that step up and play a bit more consistently rather than showing up every so often. Someone like Leon Bailey, for example, he loves showing up in big games, but whether he does it on a consistent basis is another question.
Yeah, I think that's the main issue with the Bundesliga, and probably why Bayern have been so dominant over the years. I think teams have just struggled to get that consistency. Like you've seen it before with teams like Leverkusen, Leipzig, obviously BVB as well. Like they can be absolutely brilliant on the day. They can turn over obviously the way that Leipzig turned over Atletico. A lot of people would have been wondering why were they so short in the Bundesliga, But I think that's what it depends on, yeah.
Yeah, I think there is massively that level of consistency, and even in a season last season where it was so stop-start, and even when Bayern had ultimately a stinker at the start of the season where obviously they chopped and changed their manager, they were as low down as 4th or 5th at one point, well into the season as well. And then obviously perhaps the break in terms of, the lockdown might have helped them just recharge a little bit. But after that, there was absolutely no question. They just came steamrolling back and then just won it out of canter again. So even in a season where they ultimately struggled, they've still won it quite easily. So again, going into a fresh new season, if Bayern get off to a good start, then it's hard to look past anyone like Bayern.
Yeah, I think that is a good point, because historically Bayern have been slightly slow starters. I think it's a little bit unclear. Obviously, a lot of Bayern players are internationals, and quite often they have international games and these very big kind of long international tours to America or to China. And I think that could be part of the reason why Bayern kind of come out of the blocks a little bit slow. But I think that is key. I think it's hard to disagree with the fact that if Bayern do come firing out of the blocks, then it's going to be really, really hard to stop them, even more than ever. Because obviously this, in contrast to what I said at the end of season review, I think this Bayern side has kind of gone on to prove themselves as a great Bayern side, really. Obviously with the Champions League win, which Rory predicted, by the way. So I hope you won your cash with that. Yeah. But I think it's a good starting point. Yeah. And obviously myself living in Germany as well. For those of you that don't know, I live in Nuremberg, which is near to Munich, actually. And quite a lot of people are frustrated by the dominance of Bayern. I think they've won now 8 titles in a row since Jurgen Klopp managed to win the title in 2012. So what do you think about that, Rory? Do you think it's maybe bad for the Bundesliga, the fact that Bayern do keep winning it?
Yeah, very much so. Obviously, as a league that I follow closely and kind of watch and support as well, you always want a competitive title race. Ultimately, just as lockdown finished, I was really excited about the fact that there was a couple of teams involved in it still. But as I said, it kind of evaporated after a few games because those teams around Bayern fell away really quickly. So I think it's vital for the interest in the league that there's a bit more competition at the top of the table. Hope I'm wrong in saying that. I don't feel like it's going to be like that this season, but the way the teams are shaping up right now. But yeah, massively. I think obviously similar sort of thing with the Premier League. As Liverpool completely ran away with it, interest starts to kind of dwindle a little bit. So yeah, massively, definitely want a competitive title race this season. That would be great.
Yeah, I think everyone agrees with you, Rory. I think we would all like to see another winner. I think, there's even some funny stories that some Bayern fans based in Bavaria, they even want another team to win the title just to break up the status quo. But I know they won't be the kind of die-hard Bayern fans, because obviously, as with every big club, they do have some kind of plastic fans, so to say. But I think, there are definitely people who wouldn't begrudge another team winning the title just to increase interest, Yeah, because I think the Bundesliga has so much potential as a league, and it is a great. I mean, the stadiums are absolutely packed to the rafters every single week, even at the small clubs. And I think it would be great to see a more competitive league with different teams winning. I think it's not a lack of quality that's the problem. I think it's just that Bayern are just such a powerhouse, and they're just so hard to stop, really. Yeah. Okay, so that brings us nicely onto the Champions League race. Now, obviously, we've already mentioned quite a few of the contenders for the Champions League. But Rory, are there any other teams that you fancy there to contend?
Yeah, there's probably a couple that are still knocking around. I had good seasons last season as well. Obviously, you can't look past the other Borussia team, which is Borussia Mönchengladbach. They still got a very exciting team that are playing some nice stuff post lockdown. So they'll certainly be up there again. We've not mentioned possibly the likes of Hoffenheim and Wolfsburg, who also started to play some decent stuff post lockdown and were in the mix, although it was more a Europa League race at that point. But those are three teams possibly that could again, take advantage of slow starts or a poor season from the fashionable or the usual top four. There'll certainly be a good, certainly more a competitive race for the top four than maybe the title race.
Yeah, absolutely. And another team that a lot of people are kind of excited about this year is Hertha Berlin, because obviously after getting the big signing of Piatek in January, which really, really excited Hertha fans, because obviously I think the fact that Berlin is like such a major city in Europe and they've always lacked that kind of major football club, I think it's a question that a lot of foreign people ask about Germany, like why doesn't the capital have such a major team? Because if you look at obviously England, you've got Chelsea, Arsenal, Spurs. In France, you've got Paris Saint-Germain. In pretty much every capital, Madrid, you've got the two major teams. Like pretty much every city in Europe, you've got the major teams based in the capital, really, or at least some major teams. Yeah, but I think, would you like to see Hertha Berlin maybe have a better season this year, Rory, and challenge for the top four or the top six?
Yeah, certainly be good for Berlin as a capital to have one particular stellar team that are producing week in, week out. Obviously, there are two Berlin teams mixing it up at the moment with Union as well. But yeah, if Berlin could have a consistent team that are up there in the mix, it would be good. It's good for the league. I think good for the general interest in the league as well. To have obviously the capital of the country, as you mentioned. Usually that's where the powerhouses of each individual country come from. So yeah, that would be good for the league for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what about Europa League places? Are there any other teams on top of what you've mentioned that you fancy for Europa League? I think a lot of people like for me personally, I really like the look of Union Berlin to have a good season this year. I think I'm quite optimistic for both Hertha and Union. I think maybe, especially if like one of the top six wins the cup and it goes down to the seventh spot as well. I do think that Union Berlin could potentially be up there with the kind of top seven, top eight kind of positions. Any other teams in your mind?
I mean, I think that there'll be a lot of competition, and it'll be interesting to see how the league starts off. For any people who start off quickly and put a bit of pressure and ultimately kind of do a bit of a Leicester City from last season, because they had such a good start and they were in those Champions League spots for obviously the entirety of the season until just right at the end, but they still got themselves European football, which they might not have expected. So clubs are clearly capable of doing that. I mean, outside the 7 or 8 that we've mentioned, I think it'd probably be a bit of a struggle for anyone else. I know certainly Werder Bremen, who were right in the mix of the relegation last season. They've got a strong playing squad. When they can get all their players out onto the pitch, they proved that when they started to play well at the end of the season. They were putting goals, past teams for fun at one point, and when that confidence was flowing. So with that, on their back and their confidence being quite high, they might be able to start quite well. certainly not an impossibility. But other than that, I don't think there'll be too many shocks.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point about Werder Bremen, because obviously they were kind of the huge underachievers last year, and they're actually very lucky to stay up, really, on away goals, I think it was,
Yeah.
against Heidenheim, yeah. And they need like a miracle escape as well in the last 3 games just to get into that relegation spot. Yeah. So, I mean, Werder Bremen are like one of the kind of big 5, 6 clubs in Germany. So it would have been like, I don't know, it's almost similar to like Arsenal or Chelsea. Maybe not quite so severe because of the money difference, but still, it would have been a big club. I mean, obviously, there's already Hamburg playing in the second division, and they're one of the kind of big 4 or 5 as well. So that would have been really crazy to see both of them in the second division. But I think, obviously, being a United fan yourself, Rory, what do you think about Tahi Chong's transfer there? Because I think some people in Germany are quite excited about his potential.
Yeah, he's very kind of raw, and he's certainly got a bit about him. That's not translated into performances in a Man United senior shirt. He certainly showed a lot of promise in the underage teams, through the reserves and so on through there. And the fact that he penned a new deal at the club just this summer obviously shows that Ollie sees something in him going forwards. So yeah, this sort of, like, the Bundesliga might sort Chong's game, like it might suit him quite well. So hopefully he comes over, does really well, and gets a load of experience and a load of game time. Because that would be great for the player, his confidence, and obviously ultimately, if he came back to United at one point and wanted to prove himself, that's a good way to go about it. So yeah, I think he'll do well.
Yeah, I think there's been a whole list of like young English players as well that have come over to Germany, and maybe they weren't so highly rated or they weren't being given the opportunities in England. But then as soon as they come to Germany, a lot of them become like superstars. I think, for example, even Reece Nelson, he was at Hoffenheim the season before last, and it really helped him as well.
Yeah.
Like he's not really playing every game for Arsenal, but he's getting more and more game time, Obviously, the most famous one was Sancho, but also John Joe Kenny from Everton as well.
Yeah.
Like he was at Schalke last year. I think he's going to get more and more game time at Everton next year as well. I think there's been a lot of examples over the years. Obviously, Ethan Ampudu as well got a bit of game time at Leipzig. Maybe not quite as much as he would have hoped, but still, it's a good experience for him. I think Ademola Lookman as well. He went to Leipzig too. In fact, no, he permanently transferred to Leipzig now, I believe. He was at Everton and he got a lot of kind of experience as well. So yeah, so we've talked a lot about the top of the table. Now, what about the bottom of the table? Because obviously it's usually quite unpredictable in the Bundesliga who's going to go down, really. So let's start with your opinions there. Any thoughts on who's going to go down this year?
Yeah, I think the two that came up will be in trouble this season. So starting off with Arminia Bielefeld, obviously they're one team that's probably weren't expecting to see in the Bundesliga. They've not been in the Bundesliga since around 2008-09. So obviously they're not really going to have that level of experience at top level football. Obviously they've got a squad that really doesn't have that many standout players. I think they've signed Van der Horn from Swansea City, who I remember quite well because he scored a goal against Man United way back. But yeah, I think they'll struggle. Obviously, they've not really had much experience in the Bundesliga, and there's so many quality outfits in the league this year. So they'll certainly be down there. Stuttgart, that came up with them. Obviously, they're a slightly more traditional Bundesliga team. A former very powerhouse in some aspects of German football way back when. I think they'll struggle early, so they've got a bit more experience. So that might help them ultimately. A bit of know-how. So they'll be in the mix still. Other teams that were flirting around the relegation zone last year, so like your lights of Mainz and Augsburg, perhaps, who obviously did enough to survive last season. But if you kind of take into account the fact that Werder Bremen were down there and that was a bit of a one-off, maybe, then one of those two teams might have gone down as a result of Werder not, being there in a normal season. So certainly those four are going to be in trouble, I think.
Yeah, I think another interesting point about Arminia Bielefeld as well is the fact that usually the small teams in like the smaller grounds, you need to make the most of the home games as well. But obviously we saw it with Union Berlin last year as well. The famous stadium in the forest, it's like in the middle of a forest. All the people are standing and they really, really the fans back them to the hilt, and they got them a lot of big results as well, notably wins over Borussia Dortmund and some other big teams as well. And I think Arminia Bielefeld would have been hoping to do that this season, but obviously with the COVID-19 crisis, like the start of the season will be without fans. And then I do believe that here in Germany, they plan on letting a small number of fans in come like October, November time. But it's going to depend on the state that it's in. It won't be like a specific number. For example, Leipzig are allowing 8,000 in, whereas in Berlin, they can only have 5,000 in the stadium. So I do think that could have an impact on a team like Bielefeld as well, because it's going to be hard enough, as we said. Like last year in the second league, they were kind of more defensive. They had a lot of draws. I think they had 16 or 17 draws out of it. And I think they were very hard to beat, but they weren't really a great team to watch. Although they did beat my team, Nuremberg, 5-1 in Max Morlock Stadium. So they saved all the goals for that game by the sound of it. But yeah, it wasn't like they weren't a kind of outstanding team last year. It was mostly based on being hard to beat and a lot of other teams messing up, really, the reason why they're in the Bundesliga this year. So I think, I would agree with you that I can't see them staying up. And I think most people here in Germany agree, really, that they can't compete. I think we could see a similar situation to Paderborn last year and FC Nuremberg the year before. Yeah. I think, I would agree with you on some of the clubs. I think, for me, Augsburg and Mainz, they're kind of used to being in that bottom half of the table, and they usually just about do enough, I think another team for me that I really struggle to see doing well is FC Cologne as well. Because I think if you look at the way they finished the season last year, they lost like 8 of the last 9 games, which is just a disaster, really. And I think that if the season had been another 3-4 games longer, they'd probably have been relegated, really. I think, and I think also that there's a very, very weak defence there at Cologne. They've not really signed any quality to kind of plug the gaps there. I mean, they have brought in the goalkeeper Zieler from Hanover, who's highly rated, but I mean, defensively they have serious issues at that club, and I think for me they could well go down this year, along with Bielefeld. I think Stuttgart might just have enough. They do have a bit of quality, a few flair players in there as well, but I it could potentially be 3rd, 4th bottom. I can't see them finishing higher than that, I wouldn't say. Okay, let's have a look at the next point. Yeah, so we also wanted to talk about some of the dark horses to overachieve as well. So obviously some of the smaller teams who maybe you fancy to kind of have a really good season. Like I'll just put my thoughts in on this one first. So I think the ones for me were the 2 Berlin clubs, really. I'm kind of optimistic for them. I think Hertha have got a really good squad. They signed a really good goalkeeper as well from Augsburg. And I do fancy, from Freiburg, sorry, my apologies. Yeah, a really kind of long-standing goalkeeper, Kolov. Sorry, my pronunciation's not great on that one. But but yeah, he's a really good goalkeeper there. And I think they've got a lot of reasons to be optimistic. Yeah. And Rory, any other teams that you fancy as dark horses?
I mean, I've already briefly touched on them so far in this recording. I think Werder Bremen might do, might have a decent season after such a bad one last season. I guess anything better than being in a relegation playoff is considered good for them. And obviously they're not ultimately a dark horse, as they're a very well established German outfit. But seeing some of the football that they played towards the end of the season was actually really good to watch. Obviously, ultimately, they were kind of playing for their careers and their livelihoods at that time. So maybe they were, had a bit more going on it. But I still think that they've got a good caliber squad built up over there, and if they can keep a lot of their key players fit, then they might be able to have a sneak into perhaps the mix of Europa League football, or certainly a top 10 finish wouldn't be out of the question for them.
Yeah, I think especially when you have a quick breeze through their transfer history this year as well, they've probably done some of the best business, I would say. I mean, we've already touched on Tahith Chong. I think he does have potential to have a good season this year, despite his failures in a United shirt so far. But I also think they managed to get Leonardo Bittencourt on a permanent from Hoffenheim, and he was really good on loan. He was probably their player of the season last year, and I think for 7 million, that's a really good signing, to be honest with you. And I think also Omer Toprak as well from Dortmund is a really good defensive signing. Quite an experienced Turkish player. And I think they've got some really good cut price. They've kind of gone to some of these big money clubs and they've kind of got some of their fringe players. But I think really some of the signings are quite impressive there. And I would agree with you that they'll definitely improve on next season. I don't see them being anywhere near the dogfight this year anyway. And what about you big clubs to struggle? Do you have any kind of thoughts on that? Some of the kind of big powerhouses of German football who are going to struggle?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, very much based off last season as well. I think as a big club, you can't look past Schalke. Obviously, they're a really well-established club, and just after lockdown, they were in a fairly decent position to challenge for European place, and just was an absolute car crash of a end of a campaign. Obviously, the manager at the moment, Wagner, struggling to keep his squad together as well. In the market so far, they've lost a couple of players, most notably Weston McKennie, USA player who was one of their outstanding players in a dreadful season last season. Has gone on loan to Juve, obviously ultimately with an option to buy. So that's a big loss in the midfield, in the engine room, especially. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were in and around the relegation zone this season. Obviously, they could be last season's Werder Bremen, really struggling at the wrong end of the table. So yeah, for me, they're the standout team that look in trouble for next season.
Yeah, I think they've got real financial problems at that club. Really, I think if you look, the highest profile signing is Ipswich from Hoffenheim, and while he has been like a good solid striker for the last 5-6 years at Hoffenheim, like his age is well into his 30s, and he's not really the kind of free transfer as well. He's not exactly the kind of signing that's going to get Schalke fans off the edge of the seat. I do feel a bit sorry for David Wagner because I do like him from his days at Huddersfield, but I think he'll have a good job on his hands to keep his job up until Christmas. I think, to be honest, because Schalke is one of the big 4 clubs in Germany, along with Bayern Munich, Dortmund and Hamburg. Mm-hmm. And I think the fans have really, really high expectations, and they're not going to settle for another season of bottom half football. And I agree with Rory on some points that they could even sink even further than bottom half and go into that bottom 3 potentially, because I think it's a low quality squad, to be honest with you. And they've lost a lot of the quality that they did have, which wasn't much anyway, in truth,
Yeah.
I think the other team that I would add to that list is probably Frankfurt as well. Obviously, Frankfurt 2 years ago were just a penalty shootout away from the Europa League final. They also won the German Cup, which was their kind of biggest night in their history, really, beating Bayern Munich. I think at that time they had Kovac as the coach. They had some really good players like Haller, Jovic, and Rebic. And I think it's really sad to see where they've fallen since. Again, another club that you could say that the board has put money ahead of success, really, because they've not really reinvested a lot of the money that they received in those transfers. I mean, it's unknown whether they have financial issues there, but it's last season, obviously a poor season, finishing in lower mid-table. I expect more of the same this season, or again, potentially they could even slip a couple of places further down and be involved with that mire at the bottom of the league, I think. It's which is a pity because Frankfurt is like a really cool city and they've got great fans as well. Frankfurt, yeah. Okay, and the next point we wanted to discuss in this preview is about the fast starters. So we've had a little look at the first 5 fixtures from all of the Bundesliga teams, and I just want to find out from Rory what you think. Who does he fancy to kind of fly out of the blocks this season? So yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, having had a quick look at the first 5 fixtures for the coming season, it looks like RB. Leipzig could have a quick start to their season. Couple of quite presentable fixtures in their first 5. They have got a tricky game against Leverkusen, second game up. However, other than that, those 4 games are really winnable. And ultimately, if they want to be putting pressure on Bayern, they do need to come out of the traps and be, at least 4 for 5, or if not 5 wins out of 5. Obviously, looking outside of RB, the fixtures have fallen quite nicely for Bayern as well. Without sounding like a broken record, as bad a starters sometimes Bayern are, the fixtures look really nicely put out for them already. Even if they are, maybe struggling a little bit, perhaps mentally, maybe they're not as motivated sometimes if they've come off especially if they've come off the back of a treble-winning season. Are they going to be that up for it to start with, especially after not having much of a break? But I still expect them probably to be 5 out of 5. So it's going to be tough for many teams, as we've mentioned, if Bayern start as quick as they may well do. So yeah, certainly at the top end of the league, that's what looks like it could be a quick start for those 2 teams.
Yeah, and I think I think towards the bottom, the kind of mid-table, lower end of the season, I think the side that I fancy to really come out of the blocks flying is my beloved Union Berlin. I think viewers of the show can probably already tell that I have quite a soft spot for Union Berlin. Yeah. But yeah, I think they've got some really nice home games in there. Like they start with games like Mainz, Freiburg, and at home. I think that's a really nice. I mean, they've got a couple of tricky away games, Schalke, but you've got to question, is Schalke a tricky game more on name rather than on team? And I think it's a case of yes, because as we mentioned before, both of us fancies Schalke to have a difficult season this year. So I think realistically there, you've got 4 out of the kind of, like with Augsburg, Freiburg, Mainz and Schalke, you've got like 4 of the potential strugglers, 3 of them at home. So I think you could realistically be looking at like 10 points from the first 5 games there easily. I mean, obviously it's easier said than done. Like some of these teams are pretty capable as well. But I think with the fact that like Augsburg have lost a few key players as well, like probably their best player, Philip Max, actually left the club this year. And I think they will like that as a first fixture. And while they still have some quality in there, the likes of Florian Niederlechner, I think overall, I think you'd fancy Union Berlin to get off to a good start there at home against Augsburg. And the same with teams like Freiburg, who've also been unfortunately weakened this year after a brilliant season last year, finishing 9th, which was totally unexpected. They've also lost some key players as well. And I think Union will be quite hopeful that they can get some points on the board nice and early to avoid a relegation battle and push on for that mid-table as well. Yeah, okay, so that brings us on to another major point of discussion before any season commences, which is the transfers. So obviously with the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been, like, I think globally, apart from in Chelsea, I think there has been a global kind of transfer slowdown, really, which is natural considering money's a little bit tighter, maybe travel schedules are a little bit not so easy to organize. So, but there have still been some pretty big deals in the Bundesliga, yeah. So Rory, any that really stand out there that you're looking forward to seeing?
Yeah, I mean, the ones I'm looking forward to seeing, obviously more on a kind of positive note rather than the players that have actually exited the league, which obviously are quite notable. But in terms of players that I obviously like the look of. It'd be good to see Leroy Sané back playing football after a long layoff. It's quite hard to watch him at Man City tearing things up as a Man United fan. But yeah, obviously he's missed a lot of football, so he obviously just adds to the absolute plethora of attacking talent that Bayern have got. And obviously, as Ivan Perisic has gone back to his parent club, as has Coutinho. So obviously that, there was a bit of a gap in the squad depth in that regard. So Sane fills that perfectly for Bayern. So that's obviously a major plus point for them, and his age profile as well, being, a very good age. Other than that, obviously, it'll be really interesting to see how Jude Bellingham gets on at Borussia Dortmund. Yet another young Englishman who's found his way over in the Bundesliga. Obviously, so fresh and young at the moment. Obviously, heard lots and lots of good things from Birmingham City. They've gone as far as retiring his old number. Which did make me laugh considering his age and the amount of appearances he's managed to probably knock up at Birmingham. But yeah, I mean, he looks like a real talent, and I'm sure he'll get game time at the club. So yeah, he'll be a really exciting player to watch. Obviously, especially mixing in that already exciting attacking lineup that Dortmund already have with Sancho, Reina and Haaland, obviously, if they do keep Sancho. So that's certainly one player that'll be interesting to look out for. And then maybe one other is being Lazaro. That's a player that's come into Borussia Mönchengladbach. That's, adding to their exciting line as well. Hope obviously that'll strengthen their push towards Champions League football. So he's another one that I obviously like the look of. Obviously, it's a shame for the league in general that the likes of Timo Werner and Kai Havertz have already kind of left their clubs. I mean, I suppose it's fair enough that Werner was knocking around RB for quite a while, but Havertz probably could have made a real major impact on the Bundesliga and been a proper standout player for years to come. But I guess the draw to Chelsea was too much. So it'll be interesting to see how the new faces get on.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you touch on the Jude Bellingham transfer, because I think maybe even 2 or 3 years ago, it would have been unthinkable that a young English talent to go abroad. Because I think obviously in the past it was always the classic, the young English player comes from a smaller club and goes to one of the top 5-6 powerhouse clubs. But I think obviously, given the fact that a lot of players have had their careers effectively ruined by these big clubs, I mean, there's no end of players where Danny Drinkwater, Scott Sinclair, Jack Rodwell. Paul won't thank me for saying some of that, but I think there's no real denying the fact that, moves too early in the career destroyed because they don't get enough game time. It's I think you can't put a young talent just on the bench playing under 21s football for years on end. And I think you've seen, obviously, Sancho is kind of the real big success story, but you've seen other success stories as well. Reece Nelson, obviously, there's been really a lot of these young English guys. John Joe Kenny, another one. There've been a lot of them. Some of them at a lower level. Even if you look in the second German league, there's a lot of players on loan from Arsenal, Chelsea. It would really surprise you, I think. And I think obviously the fact that Jude Bellingham has decided to join, to take the challenge to kind of learn a new culture, to learn a new language possibly, I think it's a real kind of, it shows just how highly these young English players, first of all, value the Bundesliga, and secondly, how much they want to play first team football at the highest level. I think it really has helped the English national team as well. Obviously, Sancho now is a first team regular. It's really good. I think it's and I think also other transfers. I think one that you didn't mention as well, which we touched on a little bit earlier, was Patrick Schick to Leverkusen. I think you mentioned that Havertz has left, but I think he's a very able replacement. Played a lot of football on loan from Roma at RB Leipzig last year. I'm surprised that Leipzig didn't try and take him permanently. Maybe it was a financial issue. I don't know, but I think like he was a regular fixture in their starting lineup that made the semi-finals of the Champions League. I think that's a 26.5 million. I think that's a pretty decent, by German standards, that's really a lot of money. Like
Yeah.
German people think that's like a mega transfer, but I think obviously compared to English sums, it's really peanuts, to be honest, you know. That you see championship players going for almost that kind of amount now. But I think, yeah, that's a really good transfer. I think also Lazar Samardzic as well from Hertha to RB Leipzig, highly rated Serbian midfielder that kind of made his name at Hertha. That could be a bit of a dent in Hertha's chance of finishing high up as well. But another good young signing for Leipzig, continuing their kind of project of signing young, hungry players and then selling them on for big profits, really. I think, yeah. I think any thoughts of like signings that surprise you a little bit, or maybe you're a little bit disappointed with?
I mean, I think due to the situation that COVID-19 has put lots of clubs in is probably the reason why there's not been that much certainly going on in the Bundesliga in terms of incomings. Quite a lot of teams seem to be, reverting to going back to the sort of loan deals that might have, paid dividends in the past. Like, for example, obviously RB, as you mentioned, haven't gone, big for Patrick Schick. They've obviously had to kind of, knock that on the head, and they've gone back to say, they've gone for another loan option for Angelino, which, they'll just have to be contributing wages to rather than big lump sums. Teams probably can't gamble too much on, big transfers in this sort of circumstance because of potentially putting themselves out of business just, by doing the one big transfer that doesn't go well for them. So I think that's probably the nature of why we've not seen that many big transfers so far this season. Obviously, there's still about a month to go until the window closes. So as the season starts and particular teams might struggle, then they might just have to react and have to go into the market even if they don't want to. So I think there'll probably be more as we go along. Whether there'll be any major ones, we'll have to see.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point that you make about loans as well, because I think probably one of the big signings as well that we haven't mentioned there yet was Valentino Lazaro. He was kind of like, he was a failed transfer into Milan, but I think to go to Gladbach, it's a huge coup for them really to get Lazaro. I think it's obviously like didn't really do his stuff at Inter Milan, but I think at Gladbach, obviously playing Champions League as well, it's a great opportunity for him to kind of get his career back on track, and also an exciting signing for Gladbach fans as well. I think another one that maybe might get Dortmund fans excited is this signing of the young midfield Brazilian Rainier. I'm not quite sure how on the pronunciation there, Rainier or Rainier. But I think, it's another young signing from Real Madrid. Obviously, Dortmund had the success with Hakimi for 2 years as well, who was really successful at fullback. That could be another one that kind of excites, although I can't profess to know too much about him myself yet, but maybe we will get to know more about him in the coming weeks. So, just another point, just on the managers as well. Obviously, just a little talk about the managers. Lucien Favre is still at Dortmund. Does that surprise you a bit? Because I know a lot of the Dortmund fans were kind of tired of him, really.
Yeah, I think he's maybe on borrowed time a little bit at Dortmund, and so often they're wanting to be the team that knocks Bayern off their perch, and obviously in recent seasons they've not been able to really do that. They still, generally speaking, play this good attacking brand of football, but I think as the club culture, they want success. A slow start might pave the way for the board to make a decision and maybe get rid and bring someone new in with some new ideas, and maybe someone that's proved himself in the Bundesliga, with a slightly lower team down, and might have something like a similar effect like Klopp did. But yeah, we'll have to see what happens with that.
Yeah, because I think you can't really say that Dortmund haven't backed the board in the last few years. Like, I mean, they're trying the absolute best to keep Sancho as well, which I think both of us predicted on the end of season review that it was a shoo-in that Sancho will be going to United, really. But obviously it's getting closer and closer to that deadline, and they seem to be really trying to avoid losing one of the best players. And I think they deserve credit for that. And I think obviously the signing of Haaland as well. I think Dortmund always have that kind of transfer coup because of the name. I mean, I think everybody remembers that great Klopp team when they made the Champions League final, and I think for a few years the yellow wall was kind of like the envy of every club really on the planet, really. And I think the fans and the culture of the club like will always kind of be a pull to players as well. Obviously, I think everybody expected Haaland to join either Leipzig or one of the English giants. Whereas he chose Dortmund, he's probably not getting paid as much as he would have been at some other clubs as well. So I think that shows the kind of pull, and that the board are doing more and more to kind of support a transfer push, a title push. But Favre, I mean, obviously the season before last year, he went to the last day, but they should have had the title won that year, really. They were 9-10 points clear and they blew up. Then obviously last year it was kind of the title showdown with 4 games to go against Bayern. And again, they came up short. So I think more is expected, really, and I think they should be challenging better than what they are, really, in my view. Okay, so just to finish this preview, I just want to go to the kind of final predictions. Myself and Rory are both going to give our top 4, our European play, our Europa League places, which is 5th and 6th, and then our bottom 3. So remember that in the Bundesliga, the third from bottom is like a kind of relegation playoff where the team plays the third from top in the second division, and then the bottom 2 teams are automatically relegated. So over to you, Rory. What do you think?
Right. So my top 6, or we'll say top 4, will go as follows. So Bayern will win it in first. Followed by RB, Leipzig in second place. They'll be runners up again. Third place, Borussia Mönchengladbach. And then Borussia Dortmund will come 4th, because I think Sancho will eventually come to Man United. Fingers crossed, we'll see. And then, so that's top 4, Champions League. Outside of that, I'm going to say Wolfsburg will get 5th place, as well as Hoffenheim in 6th. Sorry, scratch that. I'm going to say Leverkusen 5th, and Wolfsburg 6th. And then my bottom 3, so 18th place and last, I'll say Armenia will struggle massively, so they're going straight back down. And then saying Augsburg will come 17th, so they'll automatically go down. And then Stuttgart, newly promoted, will get that 16th place and have a relegation playoff match, which I reckon they'll win.
Yeah, okay. So for myself, I agree that Bayern have got to be the title winners this year. But my second place, I'm going Leverkusen, actually. I know Rory tipped them as 5th, but that's one big kind of disparity between our predictions. So I'm going to go for Leverkusen second, and then Leipzig in 3rd, and then Dortmund, I agree, in 4th, because I'm just not fully sold on Favre, and I think the sale of a few key players might affect them as well. And I think it's a very competitive top 4 or 5 this year in the Bundesliga. Then in 5th, I'm going to go for Hertha Berlin. I've been tipping them up, so I've got to put my money where my mouth is, I guess, and say, yeah, they're going to finish 5th this year. There's usually a shock in the Bundesliga of a team that do better than expected. Then I'm going to go Wolfsburg in 6th, and then Union Berlin in 7th, actually. I added Union in there because they're another of my favorite little clubs. And I think some of you might be wondering where Gladbach are in my predictions, but I think Champions League and then potentially Europa League could derail them. and generally they have a pretty smallish squad, and I think too many games could derail their challenge for a top 6-7 finish. Then third from bottom, I'm going to go for Freiburg, actually. So despite them having a good season last year, I think they might drop back a few places due to a few key departures, particularly the goalkeeper. And then my bottom two are going to be FC Cologne and Arminia Bielefeld. I think Bielefeld, for the reasons that we've mentioned before, and Cologne, just based on their lack of transfer activity and also their poor finish at the end of last year, where it kind of makes my decision. Second season syndrome, as they say. Okay, so I think that pretty much concludes our first ever Bundesliga show. So I just want to remind you guys that from the first week of the season, which is Friday the 18th to Sunday the 20th, we will record sometime over that weekend, and then you'll be able to see the video as of the Monday morning when you're on your way to work or whatever. We really hope that you tune in and that you enjoyed our first ever show. And yeah, we look forward to checking in with you guys again. Just one last quick reminder, as always, as is custom with our videos in Over the Bar, if you want to visit our very active Twitter, then feel free. You can just see at the bottom there at Over the Bar FB. So please feel free to follow us on there. And also the website, which is our kind of main thing. We have very, very regular articles coming up on there. Just a second. Yeah, there you can see it there. So please feel free to check that out. Like and subscribe as well. This is really important to us if you can help us grow bigger and we can produce more and more content. Yeah. So thank you again for joining us for our first Bundesliga show. We hope you enjoy the first week of action, and we will see you back in next weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.